I love this Nautilus shell as a way of giving us that feeling of going to the center. And this is what we're about with engaging the transcendent function and the unconscious. It's all about going to the center. Here is how I introduced the talk in the newsletter, and this is basically what I'm going to be following tonight. Essentially, how does a person move from living one's life as history to living one's life as odyssey, as an ultimate coming home to oneself? And how do we find the deepest meanings of our fateful lives? Jung found that we do this by living symbolically, not in some Disney-esque fashion, not in some fantastical way, but by discovering the symbolic or archetypal meaning of our everyday life experiences. Now, as I was preparing this talk, I spent quite a number of actually weeks working on the talk, and through a computer glitch, I lost the entire presentation. And so I began to put it together again, kind of via the synchronicities that came. And it became a much more living document when I did it this way. So two weeks ago, I began kind of reconstituting and beginning anew. But one of the experiences, of course, that we had on the 5th of November was the election. And we'll be talking about that in more detail and sharing our experiences regarding the election on Saturday. But I was wanting to find an image, a guiding image for this constellation of opposites that we're experiencing right now. And the question I had was, how do we hold the tension of opposites that we are experiencing? And what is a guiding image for this constellation of opposites? So I consulted the I Ching to see what the Book of Changes might offer in terms of an image for this constellation of opposites. And the hexagram that I received was number 48. Probably many of you are familiar with the I Ching and especially hexagram 48. It's entitled The Well. And the translation that I'm using here is the translation by Richard Wilhelm that Jung also used himself. But the hexagram 48, the well, describes as the judgment. It says the well. The town may be changed, but the well cannot be changed. It neither decreases nor increases. They come and go and draw from the well. If one gets down almost to the water and the rope does not go all the way, or the jug breaks, it brings misfortune. So this is the image. And the idea of the well with two warnings or admonitions. If one doesn't go deeply enough to go all the way down to the water, this is misfortune. And also if the jug breaks, this is misfortune. And so for me, this is so timely in terms of an image for this experience of the opposites. How important it is for each one of us, first of all, to maintain the integrity of our vessel, that vessel. If the vessel breaks, it brings misfortune. We know that if we don't have an integrity about ourselves, then we're open to the collective influences that throw us off our balance. It's through our shadow side that collective can come in and fill our vessel with anything but the water of life, right? And if we don't maintain the integrity of the vessel, but even become overwhelmed and the vessel collapses, then there's no access to the water of life. So in the following description, Wilhelm writes that the well on the bottom of this slide, the well as a means for accessing the unconscious or the depths. I've added that phrase. The well as a means for accessing the unconscious or the depths has remained the same from ancient times to this day. Thus, the well is the symbol of that social structure which, evolved by mankind and meeting its most primitive needs, is independent of all political forms. It's interesting that this hexagram talks about the political forms. Political structures change, as do nations, but the life of man with its needs remains eternally the same. This cannot be changed. The water of life is also inexhaustible. It grows neither less nor more. It exists for one and for all. The generations come and go, and we all enjoy the water of life in its inexhaustible abundance. So the two main ideas that I want to emphasize here would be the integrity of the vessel. This is so very important as we're going through these tension of opposites, and then to go deeply enough to reach the water of life. These are the two admonitions. Now, we've been reading the Red Book on Monday nights in a seminar that I conduct, and Jung was facing, in his experience of what became the Red Book, he was facing the unknown and the collective darkness of the Great War. If you remember, he was having his experiences that became the Red Book experience in the end of 1913 and the beginning of 1914. And so he was experiencing visions, dreams, apocalyptic imagery, huge upheaval of the unconscious during this time. And so he worked with this huge energy. And what we have, thanks, thanks to his suffering and his work, we have now that record of the Red Book. But in the second part of the Red Book, he offers this image of what he describes as the three prophecies. And this really speaks, I think, to his experience of facing the Great War, but our own experience in facing the fact that, our entire world is at war right now, for that matter. And so the three prophecies, he says, my soul gave me three things. These were the three prophecies. The first was the misery of war. And that sounds strange that the soul is giving him the misery of war, but the misery of war, the darkness of magic, and the gift of religion. So the misery of war is obvious to us. The misery of war is the suffering of the opposites. I mean, that's essentially what war is suffering of the opposites, and all the many forms that we suffer, the opposites. Now, out of the suffering of the opposites, the second prophecy is the darkness of magic. Now, out of the misery of war, out of holding and suffering the tension of opposites, comes the darkness of magic. And this is the symbolic world, the symbolic life, and the magical transformation that happens via the symbol. So you have the misery of war, the opposites, you have the darkness of magic, which is the symbolic world. And the third is the gift of religion. And the gift of religion would be essentially having a religious attitude towards that symbolic life, into the life of the psyche. And so with the opposites comes the symbolic, and with symbolic, we have that opportunity for a religious attitude. I mean, it just fits so perfectly, in a sense, where we are right now, and of course, where Jung was back in 1914. I want to continue that image of the well, because in fact, the well is a wonderful image for the transcendent function. Because essentially we're going to see that the transcendent function is about joining conscious and unconscious together, and to lower our jug down into the water below and to draw it up is a perfect image for bringing together conscious life and unconscious life. So this is what Jung says about the transcendent function. He says the process of coming to terms with the unconscious is a true labor, a work which involves both action and suffering. So he makes no bones about it. It has been named the transcendent function by Jung, because it represents a function, the psychic dynamism, that is based on real, the conscious, and imaginary, unconscious, or the rational, the conscious, and the irrational, unconscious data, thus bridging the yawning gap between the conscious and the unconscious. He borrowed the term transcendent function from mathematics, where the transcendent function there is a combination of real and imaginary numbers joined together. So he borrowed this to describe this coming together of conscious and unconscious life. Now here is the really important line. He says, it is a natural process, a manifestation of the energy that springs from the tension of opposites. So it's a manifestation of energy that springs from the tension of opposites, and it consists in a series of fantasy occurrences which appear spontaneously in dreams and visions. So we could say symbolic material. So it is the manifestation of the energy is the symbolic material that springs from the tension of the opposites. Let's take a look at what this is about. I was pondering this darkness of magic and this manifestation of energy. And what came to me was something from my earlier practice in my own dream work, where I had a practice years ago where I would write a haiku poem to capture the essence of the dream. And what I loved about the haiku form is that it is a form of poetry that is based on the transcendent function and the magic of the third. If you're all familiar with haiku, it's basically it's a 3-line poem. Classically, the first line is 5 syllables, the second line is 7, and the third line is 5 again. I mean, that's not a hard and fast rule, but essentially the 3 lines is important because what haiku does is it takes 2 images, 2 objects, 2 images, 2 experiences, and juxtaposes them, just like we have the koi in this painting. It takes these 2, and then out of those 2, out of this juxtaposition of the 2, then there's a magical third line. There's something, a surprise that comes out of it, or a deeper meaning comes out of it. And this is essentially what the transcendent function is. These 2 things are held together. And then out of that being held together, there is a kind of a surprising third. And I'm going to show you some examples of this, just to give us a feeling about that magical third that comes out of the 2. So let's start with the middle, in the top middle. We have a haiku that really expresses what this talk is about in the sense of the moving from history to Odyssey. Okay, so here is the haiku. The haiku says, a caterpillar, this deep in fall, still not a butterfly. So a caterpillar, this deep in fall, still not a butterfly. So the transformation hasn't happened. This is the critical shift from kind of living histories to living the symbolic life. The butterfly, what a perfect example for living that world that's in the imaginal and connected to the imaginal realm. And so if you live our life as the caterpillar, and a caterpillar and a caterpillar and caterpillar, and never quite make that transition to experiencing that imaginal life of the unconscious. This is we don't quite become the butterfly. And the fact is, it's never too late to become a butterfly, even late in fall. People sometimes say, well, why didn't I start doing this work earlier? But it's individual. Our life as a caterpillar and the transition to butterfly happens when it happens. But this is a beautiful image. Likewise, if you go to the left, here is the the experience of the imaginal world once we go out into life. And so here is the haiku. It says, that cherry tree, presumably in blossom, that cherry tree by my front gate, the start of our clouds. I like even that it's our clouds. That cherry tree, which of course would represent as a tree one's own individuation life, the front gate, and that's how one moves out into life, into the world. And that's the start of our clouds. That cherry tree by the front gate, the start of our clouds. I mean, we can ponder these things all night, these wonderful little haiku poems. The one right below it, the lamp, this is light and dark, or night and day, right? The lamp once out, cool stars enter the window frame. I love that. The light goes out and the cool stars enter the window frame. Again, this is the experience of the archetypal world, the light of the stars of night, the light of the unconscious. And then over on the right-hand side, we have at the top a poem about nostalgia. So it says, in Kyoto, hearing the cuckoo, I long for Kyoto. Isn't that kind of a poignant little poem? In Kyoto, hearing the cuckoo, I long for Kyoto. So that yearning that's just inspired by the sound of the cuckoo. And finally, the last one is the one that is most impressive to me, because it describes what I experienced this summer with my mom when she was going through her experience of her last weeks of life and her death. And it was absolutely a sacred time for me. And so here is this one that I came across that says, the cherry blossoms fallen, through the branches, a temple. That really, really touches me. The cherry blossoms fallen, and through the branches, a temple. I mean, this was so sacred for me to be there with her. And the cherry blossoms indeed fell. So this is the magic of the third. We have two things that are side by side, the opposites, and maybe not always exactly opposites, but when they're the interaction of the two, and then almost a magical third that comes out of it. This is the beauty of haiku. Now, when Jung talks about living this symbolic life, he's really looking at how do we see the poetry in life. We often talk about this, where we'll have an experience and we'll say, there's a poem in there, and I'm just going to have to write that poem. There's a poem in this experience. And so one of the ways of living this symbolic life is finding the poetry within the archetypal life moments that we experience. And in the process of finding the poetry, this moves things along and activates then the guiding function of the unconscious. It's a moving process. Now, one of the synchronicities that occurred as I was putting this together was that one of the members of our Red Group seminar shared a poem with me, which was exactly this, finding the poetry within the archetypal life moment. And so I asked her if she would be willing to share the poem with us, and she very graciously said she would. And so, Varya, I'd like you to give us the setup to the poem, and then we'll listen to the poem that you've written that finds the poetry within a very archetypal life moment. Essentially the life moment of the ending of a relationship. I mean, this is archetypal. So are you there, Varya?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Varya, from San Antonio. Yes, so the poem that I wrote was written in the context of another group. We were given a prompt, and so we had some freedom with the prompt. But for me, what I did was I thought about what would it be like to be a leaf falling from a tree, and what would that experience be like? Um, so I wrote the poem, and of course, the context of my personal life found its way in there, in the midst of a severance of a relationship. And the experience, the feelings of all of that um, somehow became magically encoded in the words of the poem. This is called Falling Leaf. Once I was green. My twig held me tight and fed my veins water. I faced the sunlight. But slowly my tip yellowed and dried, and even from friends I wanted to hide. The yellow plague spread into brown until my stem turned itself down. One day a gust sprang from the north, cracked my stem and severed me from tree. How terrifying it is to fly so free. The gust pushed my curves to angle the course in tumultuous twists and somersaults. Thump. I lay shocked on the soil. Gradually, I felt what this place was about. Brown and tattered neighbors I'd known touched my sides. They'd also been blown about. And look, a familiar branch from above, all dried up, but still brimming with love. A radiant acorn patiently sits and awaits its chance to fully exist. From seed to sapling to towering tree, I must allow things to be as they be.
Thank you, Varya.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This is finding the poem, right? And the life experience. And I like that it, especially like that it even follows kind of the haiku pattern of there's the connection to tree, there's the severance, and then the fallen leaf, and then there's suddenly this ending. It's this radiant acorn patiently sits and awaits its chance to fully exist. From tree to sapling to towering tree, I must allow things to be as they be. I mean, this is I don't know, it captures exactly, Varya, what we're looking at is capturing, is finding the poem that's in the experience. And again, this acorn image at the end is so striking, in the sense of the individuation process even as well. There's a kind of a famous interview where Jung is asked to explain this complicated term of individuation, and he says, it's not complicated at all. Individuation, it's an acorn that becomes an oak tree. And so this is the seed, right, that the possibility. Thank you, Varya, for sharing that, and for giving us an example of finding the poem. Now, what Jung said about this poetry of life, in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, there's a very famous passage where he talks about trying to find the images, the poetry, if you will, would be in the emotions. And he wrote this as he was entering into those very difficult experiences, which were translated into the Red Book. And so as he experienced these huge, big emotions and these huge visions and dreams, all this was going on, he wrote that to the extent that I managed to translate the emotions into images, that is to say, to find the images or fantasies which were concealed in the emotions, I was inwardly calmed and reassured. Had I left those images hidden in the emotions, I might have been torn to pieces by them. The archetypal energies of that moment, that's what would tear him to pieces, if it's all just acting unconsciously on him. So as a result of my experiment of active imagination, I learned how therapeutic it can be, or helpful it can be from the therapeutic point of view, to find the particular images and symbolic patterns which lie behind the emotions. And so this idea of life and then death and rebirth, I mean, this is the pattern that Varya you found in your poetry. And Jung would literally invite clients and himself, for that matter, to speak to dialogue with the emotions or the moods, to have a dialogue with what is that within myself that's afraid or that's angry, and to allow the mood or allow that part of myself that's experiencing the mood to speak, even allowing the mood to speak, the emotions to speak, and find the image. And in the conversation, perhaps even other figures within the psyche would join in the conversation. But this was an engagement of the unconscious that he actually encouraged because he found it so helpful himself to find those images. Now, we can also do this through art, activating the darkness of magic through making art. And I've given a couple of examples here from my own working with dream images to offer a suggestion that if you're painting your dreams, and many people do paint their dreams, is to select images, the two-ness in the dream. Find the images that kind of speak to each other or might speak to each other and put them together. Because when I painted these two, and then when I spend time with them now, it is how the two figures in the painting speak to each other. It's how the poppies speak to the snake that glides through, or it's how this great bull and the little owl, how they speak together. And these weren't actually in the same dream, but they were in a consecutive dreams. And so I just pulled them together to let the images speak to each other. And what comes out of it is magic. I mean, it really is that transcendent function when we start to work with the images together. So just maybe something to consider when you're painting or drawing or sketching your dreams is to find a two-ness and then see what will happen. Now, an impressive painting that we have here in town that I'd like to spend just a little bit of time with is a wall mural on a wall of a building in downtown Colorado Springs. Probably most of you in town here have seen it. It's it's on the corner of Pikes Peak and Tejon. And this thing is huge. It's over 60 feet tall. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time with it because it both speaks to our moment in time right now, but it also speaks to this darkness of magic through making art. Here is the artist description or background for this mural. It was painted by Greg Deal, who is an indigenous artist and activist. At the time, he was living in Peyton, which is up the road from here. I don't know if he's still in Peyton or not, but he was living in Peyton. And he partnered with the Art of the Streets in Colorado Springs in 2020 to create this 60-foot mural. It's actually more than 60 feet. He called it Take Back the Power. And the mural shows Deal's daughter, 14-year-old Sage Deal, wearing a mix of contemporary clothing and traditional indigenous accessories. She is depicted with the red handprint painted on the lower half of her face, a reference to the National Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit campaign, bringing awareness to the high rate at which Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit, the LGBTQ individuals, go missing or are murdered. So this is a powerful, powerful painting, a powerful statement. And I was struck, I was walking in that area as I was trying to reconstitute my talk, and this mural very powerfully spoke to me as this juxtaposition of the opposites that magically create the third. I mean, this painting contains the obvious and not so obvious opposites. First of all, it's father and daughter in this set of opposites with this painting. The father painted his daughter, 14-year-old daughter, to be the subject for the painting. And of course, the reality that he's trying to depict is the opposites of young feminine life and feminine life in general, right? Feminine life and what could only be called demonic or evil, that opposite of that murderous demonic side that is inflicting this kind of suffering and even death, on so many of the indigenous women and girls. So there's the opposites of the feminine life and this kind of demonic evil. I'm impressed with how the artist is able to contrast the light and the dark, because the light is shining from the right side of the painting onto her face, and she's looking to the left into the side of where the darkness would be, and how he has depicted that look in her eyes, that steely look in her eyes, that unwavering, just defiant look in her eyes as she faces what's in the darkness. It's a powerful, powerful image. And then, of course, the other opposite that he depicts would be that red handprint, and then he adds that earring, that indigenous jewelry, the earring, and this contrast is what really, really touched me in terms of these opposites. So, I mean, this earring is not just an earring, but it is profoundly special in the Native American culture. It would be an expression. For us, we would see a mandala in this image, and of course, it's a medicine wheel. It's a sun symbol. It's the circle of life. It's the four directions. All of this perhaps is contained in this red earring. Ultimately, as a mandala, it is an image of the deity or a god image. And so she wears the emblem of the god image, the deity, in contrast to this red handprint. And so between these two opposites, then we have the magical third. And of course, the magical third, I would point out, is the golden ring, the magical circle, the magic circle around her. Okay, and this is such an important psychological dynamic that if we are in tune with the self, if we have an integrity within, then the effect is a magic circle. Then, I mean, we would see this dynamic in healing rituals of all kind, where the person would be placed in the middle of the circle, for example, or in the fairy tale where the maiden would draw a circle around herself to protect herself from the devil. And so, if one is attuned to the self, attuned to the God within, then there is a oneness of the personality that protects one from the evil influences. The collective evil, the collective influences can't come into the psyche. So this is to me, a very powerful image. So I couldn't help but think about a haiku that would fit. And so I just wrote a simple haiku taking the artist phrase itself. So I wrote, "The bloody hand covers her mouth, a scarlet earring dangles, taking back the power." It's an earring that dangles, right? Bloody hand covers her mouth, a scarlet earring dangles, taking back the power. And as you sit with the painting, that third line can even kind of move and change as well. I mean, it occurred to me that with this mural in the city here, we have such a presence in the indigenous presence. And so the bloody hand covers her mouth, the scarlet earring dangles, reclaiming native soul. And then in relationship to the circle, I was reminded that whenever God draws a circle, he creates the world, or she creates the world. I've got he's here. But in this case, that magic circle, a bloody hand covers her mouth, a scarlet earring dangles, sacred ground. I mean, this mural is so powerful in expressing the sacred ground. And it seems to, I felt that it fit this moment in time where we are as well, where these are the kinds of things that are at risk and they're in danger, and how we wear the scarlet earrings, how we stay in touch with the self, the God within, the God image, so that we have this magic circle. It's a powerful, powerful mural. All right, well, this is moving from art into our dreams. The dreams would be a really, really important area where we experience the transcendent function. And hopefully, everyone's kind of following along with what the two-ness that leads to the magical third. The image here, the photograph here, is a photograph of the Rainbow Bridge in Port Arthur, Texas. It's going to appear in a dream that I'm going to be sharing with you in just a bit. But let me talk in a general way about the transcendent function, how that shows up and functions within our dreams. So in the first place, the dream itself is compensatory or a kind of opposite to our conscious attitude. So the dream itself brings together, it's bringing together an opposite with the conscious attitude. And so the transcendent function is what happens as we truly engage the dream with our whole selves to allow for the magical third. In other words, the psychic transformation that happens when we truly engage the dream with our whole self. And then the second part, as well as the formation of new symbols as a guiding spirit, as a spiritus rector. In other words, this isn't about experiencing the dream and finding a little meaning and saying, okay, well, this is what the dream means and off I go. No, this is when the dream touches us to such an extent that we engage it with our whole selves. And this is when the magical third can happen. This is when a psychic transformation can take place in us. And then, as I said, there is the flow of, or the formation of new symbols. This is also part of the transcendent function, the continuous symbol formation. That's the guiding process. Dream images which explicitly convey the connecting link between the opposites in our dreams give us a hint about what needs to be joined or wants to be joined or related somehow in the psyche. So images like bridges or staircases, elevators, thresholds of all kinds, where you have one realm and then another, the movement from one realm to the other. Liminal spaces. One example that Jung likes is waterfalls. The water flows from one level to another, joining the two. Pathways. We don't necessarily think of pathways as joining opposites, but we go from here to there, right? There is a kind of a joining of opposites. Any directional image, in fact, does this. If you go east, it implies a west, etc. And then this is something that's also important, that dream settings and images that can imply their opposite. So we're, again, watching for opposites in our dreams. We might have this dream, oh, I was in my backyard when da-da-da-da-da happens in the dream. Well, to be in the backyard implies there is the front yard. And so there is something distinct about being backyard versus front yard. So just, you have to kind of feel your way into even the landscapes to feel where the opposites are alive in the dreams. And then moving in dream interpretation from a personal association to an archetypal association of the dream imagery. So here's where we go from, like I say, a personal association. I associate this to this and this from my daily life. But when we start to associate to archetypal meanings, then we're moving to that magical third. And not that the personal associations aren't exactly the starting point that we need to ground us and connect us to the psychic life. And then finally, I've added the amplification. When we amplify the dream imagery, which means to find where does this image show up in myth and fairy tales and scripture and literature and life in general, cultural life in general. When we do an amplification like that of an image, then it's not just to find a meaning. Oh, it means in the Chinese culture such and such and such and such, or in German myth it means this. No, it's in fact to allow for the fantasy to evolve, and even for a haiku, what I'm calling a haiku level of meaning to appear, often via one's intuition. So this is the play of the opposites that are in our dreams that we might not always be thinking about. Now, synchronistically, I have a men's group, dream group that I run of guys in San Antonio that I've been running for about 15 years. And it's one of the fellows is I shouldn't go to the dream yet. One of the fellows in the group is 94 years old. He's been faithfully in this group forever. And he is at 94. He is very alert, and he provides dreams that just our jaws drop when he shares his dreams. The end of life type of dreams, the meaning of life type of dreams. His dreams are like short stories. He was professionally, by profession, he was an educator. His PhD was in education. He worked in university level all of his life, teaching and also in administration. So teaching and educating was his life. And so here he is at 94, and he has this dream that I'm sure you're going to enjoy as much as we did in the group. So he's 94, and he has this dream. I am 80 years old, so he's feeling young. I'm 80 years old, and I have just retired. I have bought a very colorful green and yellow folding beach umbrella and have set it up beside the bridge approach on the Port Arthur side of the river. That's the picture I showed you earlier. That's where he grew up as a boy. I have a matching folding beach chair and a large ice chest under the umbrella. A large sign is stuck in the ground beside the umbrella. Here's the sign. It says, "Walk the bridge. If you're lucky, you might walk over a tanker or feel the bridge sway at 100 feet up. One of us will drive your car over the bridge, $5. When he shares dreams like this, we really have to test him. Is this really what you're dreaming? And he says, yes, this is how it came in the dream. Exactly. Continues. In the ice chest are soft drinks, bottled water, and beer for sale. And next to it, there's a portable rack of sunscreen products. There are baseball caps with bridge logos, t-shirts emblazoned with "I walk the bridge," salty snacks, candy, cheap sunglasses. It's a short story he's writing here. I have hired 2 minimum wage college student wrestlers as drivers for the cars and supplied them with a used Harley-Davidson motorcycle to work out return transportation if they get stuck carless for some inexplicable reason on the other side. Today, 2 cars stopped. One was driven by what appeared to be a late-term pregnant young mother with 3 little girls in the back seat, who was nervous about driving over the high bridge. She obviously needed the $5 fee more than we did, and the children wanted candy. I told her it was her lucky day, that today only expectant mothers with 3 little girls who wanted candy did not need to walk the bridge, but would be driven over for free in their car by Fred. He even had a name in the dream, Fred, our #1 wrestler driver, with a snack selection for each. Each of them waved as Fred drove them away and up the bridge. The second car that stopped contained 2 elderly, by my standards, women on their way to New Orleans to visit a nephew. In fact, this is where that roadway would eventually end up. There's the Texas side in Port Arthur. You cross over, you keep going, you drive through the Atchafalaya Basin, the swamp, and you eventually get to New Orleans. So the second car that stopped, containing two elderly, by my standards, women on their way to New Orleans to visit the nephew. They obviously met our criteria for a guest driver rather than receiving walking tips from us. So Brian, another name that just came to him in the dream, wrestler driver number 2, got behind the wheel and ferried them up and away, and they too waved goodbye. When the wrestlers returned, we drank our profit and agreed that this had been one of our better days. I mean, these dreams come to him. I mean, this is not the only one that he's had that's just like an entire short story. But you can see the transcendent function here in terms of all the various opposites within this dream. I mean, the bridge itself is the first connecting link. If you think about that, the sign on the bridge, if you cross between these opposites, one side to the other, if you're lucky, you might walk over a tanker. Well, this river was dredged out so that in Port Arthur, these big oil tankers can go up the river to the refinery. And so if you're lucky, you might walk over a tanker. Or you feel the bridge sway at 100 feet up. So in a sense, this dream even captures what it means to stand between the opposites and to feel the energy of that. You might feel, you might walk over the tanker, this huge carrier of energy that's just flowing down the channel, right, or up the channel. Or you might feel the sway, the energy of the opposites. I mean, it's just an amazing image that speaks to that experience of being in that middle there over between the tension of opposites. And then when we look at the symbols of the transcendent function, absolutely amazing. So starting with 80, we would recognize that 80 is a composite. We would know that 4, the number 4, is an expression of wholeness. The quaternity is something that Jung stresses over and over and over and over again. So 4, the quaternity is wholeness. 8 would be that 4 and 4 would be an expression of a wholeness actualized. 4 is the image of wholeness, 8 as wholeness actualized. And then multiplied by 10, this multiplier of 10. So it is just enhanced, enhanced, enhanced. So now if we think about 94 years old and 80 years old, we have that juxtaposition of history, his personal history, and Odyssey. So the 80 represents his life as Odyssey, or the fullness of his life as kind of coming home with that Odyssey. The image of retire, an image of completion, but also to withdraw or to lead back into oneself. So there's kind of a double meaning there. The beach umbrella, it's a mandala. It's a beautiful mandala image. And it has that allusion to the liminal space that's there between the land and the sea, the beach. So there's a kind of a sense of that liminality is here. And of course, at the bridge that crossing the river, this is a threshold that connects the two realms over this archetypal channel, this river of life, this river of maybe energy, we can say, how life flows down this river. So this is, and we know also that this bridge connects Texas and eventually connects Louisiana, the Atchafalaya swamps, and then eventually New Orleans, which is an amazing image for the unconscious. But you can see how these two are connected. The walk the bridge sign. I would understand the walk the bridge sign as an expression of really describing, the whole business of putting the walk the bridge sign out as expressing the dreamer's vocation as mentor and teacher. This is his life work. And he's there with his sign, having people or helping people to walk the bridge. He did this all his life. And now he's 80 symbolically. It's just wonderful. Wrestlers and motorcycle. The wrestler is symbolic of engaging the opposites with strength. Think about the wrestlers fighting each other, or so we would know this is a strength that he has within his own psyche. There are wrestlers in his psyche. He's wrestled with the opposites in his life. Okay, and then this motorcycle, this powerful initiative for going out and coming back, and I don't know, it's the two-ness of the motorcycle, the wheels, and it's an individuation vehicle, and and all of these things, but engaging the opposites back and forth across the bridge. This is the energy of engaging the opposites. So it's just beautiful. And then finally, these two images, the pregnant mother with daughters. So in this dream, he is literally supporting feminine soul life. And then with that pregnancy and its emergence, crossing over the threshold. And that with that, we're assuming that the child in the womb is also a little girl, because it's going to be the fourness. There's going to be the mother and the fourness. Perhaps not. We don't know. But this is the wonderful another quaternity. So he's supporting feminine wholeness, and in fact, all of his life he really did that. He was this mentor and teacher and guide that was supporting soul life in incredible ways. And then finally, there are the elderly women, and then the nephew, who are visiting the nephew in New Orleans. And here there is facilitating the union of feminine wisdom and experience, the elderly women, and the young masculine spirit of the unconscious, that nephew in New Orleans. So think about this. The feminine wisdom is going to be, he's facilitating that joining of feminine wisdom with this young masculine spirit, or at least younger spirit of the unconscious, the spirit of the unconscious. It struck me when I was pondering the dream that this is the parallel to when Jung was talking with Philemon and Salome in the Red Book. The wise old man, and then the young dancing girl. So it was the masculine wisdom or wisdom tradition that is animated by the feminine life, the feminine soul life. And in this case, this is the feminine wisdom and experience that is going to meet up with the young masculine spirit of the unconscious. So it's a beautiful expression of the meaning of his life. What it means to live life as Odyssey, and at 94, an expression of what is that crossing that he is ultimately going to be engaged in, when the time that for that final passage for him comes. But this is what he's doing with his life, and it came literally 2 weeks ago. And so, as an example of life as Odyssey, I asked him if we could include the things that, of course, you could include it in the presentation. So here we have it. This is again how we find the transcendent function alive and operative in our dreams. Thanks to our 94-year-old dreamer. Now, finally, before we take a break, I want to talk about the Odyssey as one's myth, and how gathering in one's symbols over the course of one's life is so important. From memories, dreams, reflections, that Jung gathered symbols and images from the very early childhood all through his life. And this came to be for him his myth. He understood it as his myth, the operative symbols. And so, as a suggestion, I would literally recommend it. I would recommend doing what Jung himself did. I mean, one of the times that I've used memories, dreams, reflections in a reading group, we actually took out time with every chapter and gathered in our own memories, dreams, reflections from that time period. So, for example, the first years would be the early childhood. The second chapter would be school years. This would be the elementary years and high school, or rather the elementary years. The student years would be adolescence and going into college. The fourth chapter was entitled Psychiatric Activities, but it really would be images from one's early career. The next chapter is Sigmund Freud, but this for us would be who are the influential persons in our life as we're starting out in life. The confrontation with the unconscious would be how did the unconscious break through in our lives? So this is just an exercise in gathering together the symbols of one's life. And it's amazing what happens when you gather them together and you put them in such a circle. There was a I grew up next to a little creek that had an oak tree that hung out or grew out over the creek, and I spent hours and hours straddling that oak tree and dangling my little fishing line, trying to entice the little perch with little balls of bread on the hook. It was kind of the boyhood dream. The birds there, I didn't watch birds. I lived with birds. I raised ring-necked doves. I had my little Bosch and Lone 10-power telescope, and I spent much time out in the woods. At 8 years old, I read a book about a missionary Catholic priest in the Arctic. And it was a profound experience for me. I literally heard within my being, my head, I heard the words, "You will be a priest." And I assumed that was going to be a Catholic priest, but it turns out that my priesthood was now as a Jungian analyst, and on and on. Do this. This is a wonderful exercise. A wonderful. Take a look at just briefly at active imagination in Jung's Red Book. And he describes it again. This is how he describes the transcendent function. It is a natural process, a manifestation of the energy that springs from the tension of opposites, and it consists in a series of fantasy occurrences which appear spontaneously in dreams and visions, the symbolic material. Now we know that Jung had a very kind of fluid experience of the unconscious and the imaginal world. And not everyone has an experience quite like Jung. In fact, it is unusual, but we all can, as I said in the first part, write our poetry of life. The very ending of the first book, the Liber Primus of the Red Book. You remember the Red Book is divided in 3 sections. There's the Liber Primus, the Liber Secundus, the second book or book 2, and then there's the Scrutinies. The very ending of Liber Primus, this is where Jung is having his dialogues with Elijah and Salome. You probably have read that far into the Red Book, and you know also that experience from Memories, Dreams, Reflections. When he's having this conversation, and one of the conversations with Salome, at the very end, she tells Jung that that Mary is his mother. And Jung is just astounded. First of all, he can't believe that he's talking to Salome, for that matter. But Salome tells Jung that that Mary is actually the mother of both of them. So what he has, so in that moment, he has the experience of the reality that he is like Christ, both human and divine. In fact, this is the mystery. This is the essence of the Christian myth. That breakthrough that we into consciousness that we are both human and divine. That the God within, if you will. And so, with that experience of this is the set of opposites he's dealing with. I'm human and divine. I'm the son of Mary. How can that be? Then he sees the cross and Christ on it in his last hour and torment. And then he begins to have the experience of Christ, of being crucified. And he describes it as the black serpent has wound itself around my whole body, and my countenance is that of a lion. Now, unfortunately, this little painting, we've lost some of the picture. One of the few, in fact, that we've lost in the Red Book. But essentially, he It's a figure, he's depicting himself on the cross. The black serpent has wound itself around his whole body, and his countenance is that of a lion. The lion countenance would be his conscious personality. He describes it in various ways in different places, and that black serpent would be the spirit of the depths or the spirit of the unconscious. And so he is really crucified between the opposites, if you will, and it's his humanity and his divinity, and the snake is an expression of that divinity as well. So it's a powerful conclusion to this section, and it is his statement or testimony about the Christian myth, that the essence of the Christian myth is to suffer the opposites. And when we suffer the opposites, then, if you will, the magic happens. The haiku, the resurrection, everything happens if we suffer and endure the opposites. He writes in describing this moment, he says, I saw the death of Christ and I saw his lament. I felt the agony of his dying, of the great dying. And then get this, I saw a new God, a child who subdued diamonds in his hand. The God holds the separate principles in his power, he unites them. The God develops through the union of the principles in me, he is their union. So it's this union of the opposite, or the power of uniting the opposites, that's really the new divine life. It's amazing how he describes this. So he has this experience of the opposites. This is the culmination of Liber Primus. And this is probably the central principle in Jungian psychology, holding the tension of the opposites, working with the opposites. You can see how this comes out of his experience. Now, he launches immediately. The next active imaginations take him right into what's now become Liber Secundus of the Red Book. And Liber Secundus describes Jung's encounter with the opposites in himself. And I wanted to just briefly look at this because sometimes we wonder, well, what do we even mean about the opposites in ourselves? And essentially, each of these days, each night he would have an active imagination, and he recorded it in chapters. So we have the first 6 chapters kind of on the page here. And essentially the question, he doesn't state it explicitly, but the question that he's really dealing with each night in his active imagination, the fantasy, is the 2 questions. Where is my one-sidedness today? And what is missing in my life? This is essentially what his fantasy or his active imagination doesn't, he's not spelling this question out literally, but that's essentially what he's answering every single night when he does the active imagination. Where is the one-sidedness? Where is my one-sidedness today, psychically, and what is missing from my life? And so when we go through these 6, for example, in the chapter of the red one, he experiences in his Christianity as a Swiss Reformed Christian, he experiences what is missing is the red one, who is joy. So this is what is one-sided, his experience of that type of Christianity, and what is missing is joy. Okay, in the next experience, the castle in the forest, he encounters the old scholar in the castle doing his research, his long career and study, and this is the arc of the trajectory of his life, and what's missing is the neglected soul. The daughter of the scholar is neglected in the castle. So one can think about what is the trajectory of one's life, and where have I neglected soul in the process? My life and then soul. And then he goes from this active imagination to a reflection on his life as a Swiss citizen, bourgeois Swiss citizen, and he encounters a criminal on the street until he encounters essentially his shadow. The criminal life, he encounters an experience of the criminal that he did not have in waking life, really. He was a Swiss citizen, enjoying Swiss life, but he encounters the criminal in himself. So the shadow side, this is the opposites, what is missing. He struggles with good and evil in this moment, and then that leads him to the next chapter where he goes to the desert and meets the monk, the anchorite in the desert, because he's just struggled with good and evil and shadow. And now it's the question of, it's the religious question. So now he's searching the scriptures. The anchorite in his active imagination is searching the scriptures for meaning, searching and reading it over and over and over. And these are he shows in this little diagram the depths of meaning in the scriptures. It's a beautiful little painting. But that's not where it ends, because after reading the scriptures, the next day he actually experiences the divine in nature. And so now it's not the scripture, but it's in nature that he experiences. So these are the opposites. And then from there, from nature, in the next night, in his active imagination, he's experiencing within nature life and death, those opposites. And this particular chapter on death is based on an active imagination he has on the 2nd of January, when he's looking out into the new year of 1914, and he has this vision of death. So he has this premonition of the Great War. So these are the opposites. When we say opposites, essentially then we can ask that question of ourselves. In fact, you could take this set of questions and go off on retreat and spend a period of days and say each day, well, what is the one-sidedness? Where is my one-sidedness today? And then concurrently, what is missing in my life? These are the opposites in the psyche. So I hope that makes sense when we say, how do we even know what the opposites are in my psyche? This is one way of looking at those opposites. And then we have the amazing journal, the paintings and writings of Christiana Morgan. Christiana Morgan was an American who went over to work with Jung, to go into analysis with Jung. She was in her late 20s at the time, and she, like Jung, had quite a fluid capacity with the unconscious, the imaginal world. And so she would typically, after the end of her maybe an analytical hour, she'd go back to her flat, and she would take the time to write her notes, but then also to do an active imagination and to see what images would come to her that expressed, like, what was the process all about, and what was the process in her. And so she has an amazing set of dreams and paintings that Jung in 1930 then introduced to a group at the psychological club in Switzerland. He used this material to describe this process. And so you can see just an example of some of these. The caption says, "I knew I had become a tree and lifted my face to the sun." And so here she is having an experience of this kind of a kind of awakening and development. And she captured it in the image of this tree facing the sun, with their face to the sun. I mean, it's a remarkable painting. A bit later, she has an image or experience of the opposites. And so here she writes, "I am God and the devil. I am man and woman. I am love and hate." So somehow she depicts the opposites within herself and does this is how the image came to her. And very interestingly, there is this blue arrow, that the fiery blue arrow that at the top of the snakes. I mean, it's just amazing and powerful image that came to her that she can meditate on to experience what's happening to her. And finally, the last image, it says, "I came to a great wheel which blocked my way." And we know that the wheel represents the self. And so in her journey, her way is blocked by the self. And this is a typical kind of a dream image or active imagination image, where how our life is proceeding along becomes blocked by the self, which means there's something that has to be confronted. So one of these days, perhaps when we finish the Red Book seminar, we finish enough of the Red Book, we can do the Vision seminar. That would be a wonderful but huge work to undertake on the Monday night seminar. All right, this is active imagination. She's finding the images that describe her psychic process. So now we're going to go into what Jung actually says about active imagination to hear his firsthand description. The first portion that I'm going to share is taken from Mysterium Conjunctionis. This is volume 14 in the collected works, and it comes right near the end of Mysterium. But in this section, he's actually describing how analysis goes. And so it's a wonderful read if you're in analysis or doing analysis or just trying to work deeply with the unconscious, because he's describing now what's going to happen and how the transcendent function comes into play. So he says, active imagination, is a method which is used spontaneously by nature herself. Okay, don't forget that. The images can just come to us spontaneously like it did to Jung, or can be taught to the patient by the analyst. As a rule, it occurs when the analysis has constellated the opposite so powerfully that a union or synthesis of the personality becomes an imperative necessity. So they're not in sync. Such a situation is bound to arise when the analysis of the psychic contents of the patient's attitude, and particularly of his dreams, has brought the compensatory or complementary images from the unconscious so insistently before his mind that the conflict between the conscious and the unconscious personality becomes open and critical. So in other words, they're not in sync. What's happening in the unconscious, there's a conflict between the unconscious and conscious life. And I've just given some examples just from dreams. These dreams, if you have them, doesn't mean that you have an incurable neurosis. It just means that if you have a dream like this, there is a conflict going on between conscious life and unconscious. Some kind of attention or they're not in sync. So, for example, recurring images of darkness or inertia or deprivation, thresholds of all sorts, which imply there's a crossing that's required. Desolate landscapes, frozen landscapes, coldness, images of being chased, bitten, pursued, threatened by elemental forces, inside a collapsing house or structure, being chained, imprisoned, locked up, exposed, trapped, victimized, lost in the woods, continually late for class, missing an assignment or completion of a critical school subject. Images of one-sidedness of all kinds, whether it's a recurring flying dreams or maybe speeding or crashes, recurring negative figures, on and on. And then the opposite can be also true, that there might be beauty or desired aspect. Maybe it's always outside the window or obstructed by glass. Or there might be overly aesthetic imagery or fantastically indulgent dreams. Or maybe dreams of passively watching movies within the dream, participating in collective events or part of the mass, the herd experience, recurring images of any sort, conflicts with parental figures, the anima-animus figures, a preponderance of animals and conversely absence of animals, etc. So again, I'm just throwing out examples to give you a sense of how the unconscious can indicate that things are out of sync. Don't panic if you've had these dreams. Now, this is so interesting. When the confrontation is confined to a partial aspect of the unconscious, the conflict is limited and the solution simple. The patient with insight and some resignation or feeling of resentment places himself on the side of reason and convention, for example, responding to a case of a simple inflation. And though the unconscious motifs are repressed again, as before, the unconscious is satisfied to a certain extent, because the patient must now make a conscious effort to live according to its principles, the unconscious principles, and in addition, is constantly reminded of the existence of the repressed by annoying resentment. Okay, so we can get a dream and it can show us that we're inflated, and we can say, yeah, I'm inflated. I've got to make this adjustment. But in making the adjustment, just even the fact that we resent making it means that we're still engaging the unconscious. It's still with us. It's so very interesting. He continues, but if the recognition of the shadow is as complete as he can make it, then conflict and disorientation ensue as an equally strong yes and no, which he can no longer keep apart by a rational decision. Listen to this. He cannot transform his clinical neurosis into the less conspicuous neurosis of cynicism. In other words, he can no longer hide the conflict behind a mask. And you've heard these sort of things. Oh, that's just my nature. That's how I am. What you see is what you get. Get used to it. I'll never change. That's not going to cut it. So he says it requires a real solution and necessitates a third thing in which the opposites can unite. In nature, the resolution of opposites is always an energetic process. She acts symbolically in the truest sense of the word, doing something that expresses both sides, just as a waterfall visibly mediates between above and below, or like that bridge mediated between Port Arthur and New Orleans, or all those things, those connecting things that we saw in the dreams. The waterfall itself is then the incommensurable third. In an open and unresolved conflict, dreams and fantasies occur, which, like the waterfall, illustrate the tension and nature of the opposites and thus prepare the synthesis. Okay, so when we see a threshold in the dream or a bridge in the dream, the conflict isn't resolved, but the psyche or the unconscious is showing that there is a way to join this. There's a way to move through this. And the process can, as I have said, take place spontaneously or be artificially induced. In the latter case, the artificial induced side, you choose a dream or some other fantasy image and concentrate upon it by simply catching hold of it and looking at it. You can also use a bad mood as a starting point, and then try to find out what sort of fantasy image it will produce, or what image expresses this mood. You can then fix this image in the mind by concentrating your attention. Usually it will alter as the mere fact of contemplating it animates it. So if you're looking at it, it starts to have some energy and something happens. The alterations must be carefully noted down all the time, for they reflect the psychic processes in the unconscious background, which appear in the form of images consisting of conscious memory material. So the active imagination brings in conscious memory material in the process. Sometimes when we do an active imagination, we think, well, some of these things are coming up from my conscious memory, and so how can they be from the unconscious? But Jung says, no, this is how it works. When we're working with an image and we're attending to it, what starts to appear in the process can very much consist of conscious memory material as well. So the process of coming to terms with the other in us is well worthwhile, because in this way we get to know aspects of our nature which we would not allow anyone else to show us, and which we ourselves would never have admitted. It's very important to fix the whole procedure in writing at the time of its occurrence. So one should be writing this out as it's happening. For then you will have ocular, the visual evidence that will effectively counteract the ever-ready tendency to self-deception. In other words, is that really what I saw? Or, that couldn't have been. Maybe use that self-deception and even dismissal. A running commentary of the dialogue is absolutely necessary in dealing with the shadow, because otherwise its actuality cannot be fixed. Only in this painful way is it possible to gain a positive insight into the complex nature of one's own personality. So if you're in a dialogue with something in the shadow side, if you pick a figure that is a shadow figure of a dream, it's so important that you write this down, you record it somehow. Otherwise, it's just not going to stay. It's not going to have an effect. So many times, we don't get around to writing these things down, but Jung is stressing, write this stuff down. Okay, now I'm switching over to his essay on the transcendent function. And I'm going to skip to where he talks about how we do this. And he talks about how there are different types in terms of working with the symbolic material. We don't all experience the unconscious the same way. So he says, critical attention must be eliminated. In other words, you've got to clear the mind. And he says, visual types, the ones who see images, should concentrate on the expectation that an inner image will be produced. As a rule, such fantasy picture will actually appear. Perhaps hypnagogically, is that in the in-between place between awake and asleep, right? And should be carefully observed and noted down in writing. So if you have hypnagogic images, record them. Right when you're falling asleep or waking up, just write down those images that come to you. Now, the verbal types, the audio-verbal types, usually hear inner words, perhaps mere fragments of apparently meaningless sentences to begin with, which, however, should be carefully noted down too. Okay, so some people can actually hear the words. Not everybody experiences this the same way, so don't panic. He says others at such time simply hear their other voice in an inaudible way. Okay, there are indeed not a few people who are well aware that they possess a sort of an inner critic or a judge who immediately comments on everything they say or do. Normal people, if their inner life is fairly well developed, are able to reproduce an inaudible voice without difficulty, though as it is notoriously irritating and refractory, it is almost always repressed. Such persons will have little difficulty in producing the unconscious material and thus laying the foundation of the transcendent function. Okay, so he's talking in this paragraph about 3 different types. The visual types can actually concentrate on just expecting that an image will be produced, and if they give their attention to it, an image will appear. That's not the case with me, for example, or a case with many people, just to be open for an image and it just spontaneously appear. I'm not a visual type. The audio verbal types can hear an actual, it's like hearing a voice that expresses something. And again, there are others that hear the voice in an inaudible way. So when I sit quietly, and if I start a dialogue with the figure, say from one of my dreams or from in just doing active imagination, I don't hear the voice in a out loud kind of a way, but I know what the person is saying. There's an inaudible. I don't hear it, but I know what is being said from the other side. This is what you can cultivate when you work with if you're this type, and that would be my type as a thinking type. I don't have the visual imagery. I don't hear the words that way, but I can get that message in an inaudible way. And then people who have that critical voice, or that inner critic or the judge, then this is what you dialogue with. You actually literally dialogue with that inner critic, that inner voice. You write down what's said. There's a back and forth. And this takes you, this is really, really engaged in the unconscious now. And this is why Jung was so supportive and really encouraged people to do the active imagination because it gave them an active part in engaging the unconscious in a direct way, in addition to working with their dreams. Now he says that we now come to the next question. What is to be done with the material obtained in one of the manners described? Okay, so when you do these dialogues or do these active imaginations, as far as my experience goes, there appear to be two main tendencies. One is the way of creative formulation, and the other the way of understanding. We'll talk about these. One tendency seems to be the regulating principle of the other. Both are bound together in a compensatory relationship. We could say that the aesthetic formulation needs understanding of the meaning, and the understanding needs the aesthetic formulation. The two supplement each other. So in other words, for some people, they can facilitate the symbol, the images come, and that process can flow, and that might be their primary experience of this wonderful symbolic experience. And Jung says it needs the other side as well. It needs working at the understanding of it. Now, there are other people that have an image and they immediately go into the understanding part and they start lose touch with the symbolic side. So you need to keep the symbolic going or alternate the symbolic life and then understanding, symbolic life understanding, if that makes sense. I mean, there's no like one way to do this, but they two go hand in hand. Just creating or working with image and having the experience of the symbolic is not the whole story. There has to be some understanding. There has to be a work at what is the meaning. When Jung did the Red Book, he did his active imagination fantasy, and then there's always that section that follows where he's really working at what does this mean? And what are the deeper meanings embedded in the symbolism? So those two have to go hand in hand. All right. Let's see. So the shuttling to and fro of arguments and affects represents the transcendent function of opposites. The confrontation of the two positions generates a tension charge with energy and creating a living third thing, a movement out of the suspension between opposites, a living birth that leads to a new level of being, a new situation. The transcendent function manifests itself as a quality of conjoined opposites. Now, so long as they're kept apart, the opposites, naturally for the purpose of avoiding conflict, they do not function and remain inert. So this is why you have to bring the opposites together. And I kind of apologize for running through this a bit quickly. This is the final slide that he describes it. He says, one of the greatest obstacles to psychological understanding is the inquisitive desire to know whether the psychological factor adduced is true or correct. In other words, how do I know that what I'm experiencing my active imagination is this real? Is it true? Now he says, if the description, if you're writing this down, is not erroneous or false, then the factor is valid in itself and proves its validity by its very existence. So you might think, well, did I make this up? Where is this really coming from? But the fact that even writing it down, it has a psychic life. So Jung then says, one might just as well ask if the duck-billed platypus is a true or a correct invention of the Creator's will. And equally childish is the prejudice against the role with mythological assumptions, which mythological assumptions play in the life of the psyche. Since they are not true, it is argued they have no place in a scientific explanation, but mythologisms exist, even though their statements do not coincide with the incommensurable idea of truth. All right, this is stuff you're going to have to reread. This is not stuff you're going to get at just first hearing here. I think that's the end of the instruction from Jung. on active imagination. You can go back over the recording. You can find this section in Mysterium, or you can find it in Volume 8 in the Transcendent Function, or I don't know, maybe we can find ways to make it available. But you have to, it takes some time to really find your way into Jung's experience of it. But in summary, here are some of the modalities of active imagination that we've been looking at. So to begin with, that idea of finding the image or the fantasy within the emotion, sometimes meaning a dialogue with the emotion or the mood to find the image or fantasy. Perhaps capturing a psychic moment or dream meaning in poetry, like we saw with Varya's poem. Any creative activity which stimulates the play of opposites. You remember Jung at the shore, the lake shore of Lake of Zurich, playing with the stones and making little villages, and it stimulated his fantasy, and he had all sorts of ideas that came to him. Drawing or painting, or likewise giving form to fantasies and dreams. Any way you can do this in a creative way. We saw that amplification of dream imagery kind of enriches the fantasy around the dream image itself. You can dialogue with the dream figure or a fantasy figure. I talked about the gathering in of the living symbols of stages of life. Another form is to write one's life as a fairy tale using archetypal symbols. And this puts us out of the personal realm and really pushes us into an archetypal kind of a milieu. And finally, living the symbolic and following the inner law